Hi, welcome back to Big Sexy Chat. My name is Crystal, and I'm here today with, of course, my fabulous co-host, Merf, and we're also excited to have Tigress Osborn with us here today. So, hey, ladies.
Hey. Excited
How's
to
it
be
going,
here.
Merf?
I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk to Tigress and have this bonus episode for so many people because I know that it's going to resonate and it's going to be one of those that the ripple effect is just amazing and make a big difference for
I
folks.
agree.
Yeah.
Tigress, when we were talking about this, it's clearly not that sexy, but we really wanted to do it because we know how important it will be for the fat community. And we said, well, let's do it like a bonus episode. So, although it won't be the super sexiest episode, it's going to be really, I think, informative and helpful. And Merf, do you feel like at all addressing some of your stuff too?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm more than willing to.
Okay, cool. Let's do that. Yeah, although I think it also would be interesting for Tigress. So, okay. So, welcome everybody. I'm so happy to have everybody here. And it's always exciting to have Tigress in community. She's wonderful and just always fabulous, an amazing advocate and activist, and she does so much for all of us. And if you don't know her, trust me, she's helped out with something that you can do nowadays if you're a fat person, because she's been doing this activism for about 15 years. Tigress, 20, something like that.
Not
your whole life.
I started Full Figure Entertainment in 2008. So I came into this by way of running a plus size nightclub event in Oakland, which I do like to think was very sexy. We were very dress up and have fun times kind of event.
Oh hell yeah.
Yes. And so so since 2008 I've been sort of a public figure of fat visibility.
Absolutely. I'm so happy for all and so grateful for all that you do for all of us fatties. And so Tigress and I have something in common. We both had a hysterectomy about the same time. I had mine in December 2020. When did you have yours?
I had mine in July of 2021.
So about 6 months after me.
Mm-hmm.
And we're both fat. And I'm 54. And I should say that, tonight we might be talking about some things that might be a little bit triggering for people. We're probably going to mention exact weights, or, I don't know about exact weights. I don't know if anybody knows their exact weight, but, we'll be mentioning numbers probably. And we're going to talk about some stuff that's tough stuff around women's reproductive health and organs and all that good stuff. So if you're triggered by those kinds of things, we'll try to put some resources. Well, we will put resources in the notes, and we definitely have, I'm sure, a lot of resources that we want to share. So if it triggers you to watch this or listen to this, maybe you can read the resources. And we will also have, what's it called when you get the recording? It's all written.
Transcript.
Thank you. We'll have the transcript there too, so people want to skip over things. I don't know. It is going to be a great talk and really useful and helpful. And we're going to, I was going to also say that Tigress used to live here in the Bay Area. And this is where I met her, here in the Bay Area. So she was running these really fabulous and sexy events in Oakland. I did get to go to one. I went with my mom. It was so fun. Oh man, it was very sexy, very beautiful, cool venue, and just tons and tons of really awesome events. And now Tigress is in Arizona, doing what she can in Arizona for all of us who are on the liberal side of life and all of us who are fat.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, the liberal side of life there's more of the liberal side of life in Arizona than people think there is.
That's I keep hearing that.
It is not the Bay. It is not the Bay. It is not. So
very few things are.
Mm-hmm.
Very few things are. Yeah. Absolutely. So
I'll turn it over to you, Merf. You can. Yeah,
I'm happy to do so.
Go for it.
I want to give some information on hysterectomy. So, a hysterectomy is when we're removing the reproductive organs of a female and taking out the uterus, the ovaries, the fallopian tubes, all that stuff. And so there's different types. You can have partials, you can have a full hysterectomy. There's lots of different variations of that depending on what the need is for the individual. And so we're going to be talking about how our reproductive health impacts all kinds of things, just your physical body, your mental health, your engagement with communities, supports, how you feel about your sexuality afterwards, like, and just being able to, react and engage with people when there's a lot of myths and misconceptions is what I'm getting at. There's things that people believe that happens when you no longer have those reproductive organs. So we're going to talk about a lot of that.
I was just going to say, let's refer to people as uterus havers, maybe.
Yes.
Because
I'm sorry, I said people... female, huh? Shit.
That's okay. It's okay. Yeah, it's no big deal. But yeah, I just want to be what's the word?
Yes.
I want to be thoughtful.
It's difficult to be. It is difficult to have these conversations without anyone anywhere saying something that is like very firmly centered in the gender binary. Like, one of the things that I know is, like, as hard as I work to not use binary language around these things, everyone else in the medical system around me very much was. So I just want to in advance if I quote from people who did that, or if I slip into that. I tend to I always use the term uterati to talk about people of whatever gender identity who have those physical parts. But then when I didn't have a uterus anymore, I was like, so am I former uterati, or am I just uterati? Like, what exactly do we do with this language? But I just, thank you, Crystal, for acknowledging that, because I'm very aware of that, and I'm very aware of it when I go. One of the big pieces of having this procedure and preparing for this procedure for me was that every time I had to go to the women's health department in the local, clinic that I go to, and it's very clearly marked that. And I have lots of trans and non-binary loved ones, and I know what that would mean to them if they were having reproductive health stuff and they had to constantly be checking in at the women's health center. I had a lot of sensitivity around being someone who is childless and who has mixed emotions around that, and having to constantly be in this environment where everything was about motherhood and happy motherhood. Like in the clinic that I did a lot of my pre-op stuff in, they have like all these like pictures of pregnant bellies that are painted with flowers and smiley faces and stuff like that. And it's like, just thinking about all of us for any of the many reasons related to our identities, our life experiences, our traumas, whatever, who are not there for happy reasons and that have to have that sort of like constantly bearing down on them, is something I was always really, I had a lot of tenderness around when I was preparing for and then following up from my surgery. So I'm really grateful that y'all are creating a space where we're thinking about who might have tenderness, sensitivity, trauma around any of this, like, language and procedures.
Yeah, and we can all, for sure, start talking about uteruses and fallopian tubes. We can all fall back into that very binary language. So I'm sure I'll screw up too, but let's do our best, right? All of us, all we can do is do our best and try to be tender with other people's tender feelings.
Absolutely. Thank you. So let's jump in. Tigress, would you like to share what your experience was with getting a hysterectomy, and kind of maybe start out from what your symptoms were and kind of lead into that whole scenario?
So the sort of long story is that, or the long range story is that I was a person who had a period pretty early. I actually started my period like the same week we were doing the thing in school where you like go in the, many of us grew up at a time where there was like a thing where they separated the boys and the girls watched the special film strip, and the boys, I watched some other special film strip that talked about masturbation or something. I don't know what they did.
Free to be you and me.
Yeah. And, right. And there were all these companies like, Carefree and Tampax and stuff that sponsored these things in schools, these education programs that were also, meant to make you an early user of their product brand. And so, so I started my period like the same week as that. It was almost like the little lecture was like, and go, right? So, so I had been a person who bleeds since I was 11 years old. I'm now 47. I had my hysterectomy when I was 46, and for large periods of my life, I had I had very regular periods, and then I had no periods. And no matter whether I was on birth control or whether I, whatever was going on in my life didn't always impact that. but it was always still healthy. And through my 30s, I had a pretty regular cycle, you know, every once in a while I'd get a little off track, but then it would like sync with that. And it was, you know, sometimes kind of heavy, but nothing to be concerned about. And then I think it was in my early 40s that it really started to become like, what the hell is going on here, and what is this murder scene that I am dealing with all the time? And I know we didn't say in the content warnings like anything about graphicness of descriptions, but you know,
it's going to get graphic.
It was just, you know, I was bleeding a lot more heavily. I was bleeding a lot more. I used to always tell people 3-dimensionally, because I was having a lot of clotting, and increasingly the clotting, it was started with like a little bit of clotting, and then it started with like, is that an organ that fell out of my body? Like, by the time I was actually on the active wait list to have a hysterectomy, by the time we made it to that decision, my medical team and I made it to that decision, you know, during the first year of the pandemic. And so it was still considered an elective surgery for me. Like, you bleeding, you know, 10 to 15 days a month heavily is not a problem to us in terms of whether you're going to live. So that's still considered an elective surgery, not a life-saving surgery. So you're just on the wait list, and you're going to be on the wait list for however long that is. And so I waited for a long time. But by the time I was, you know, coming up close to it, I remember, I think it was like I don't think it was the final period before I had the surgery, but it was pretty close to that I was showering, and like, I thought like a creature ran down my leg or something. Like, there was the size of what fell out of my body and rolled down my leg. I seriously, like, is someone in the shower with me that I can't?
Alien.
It was just unreal. And, you know, and part of what happened is elders in this case, who mostly were cisgender women, would hear some of these stories and kind of go like, oh, that's how it was for me in my 40s, or, oh, that's how it was for me in my 50s. But like, nobody had ever said that before. You had to get to, we're talking a little bit more about like perimenopause and things like that now. But in my generation, at least where I grew up and then where I was, you know, living my adult life, it wasn't until I was already having those things happen to me that the conversation started opening up around like, why don't we talk about any of those things? So I knew about hysterectomies and I knew about menopause, but I didn't know that there was like a 10-year period before menopause.
That's what I was going to say.
To go haywire, right?
Yeah, let's just say it now for anybody who's listening. Mm-hmm. Perimenopause is at least 10 years. Mm-hmm. You might get lucky. It might be less, but it also might be more. And there's going to be 10 solid years. And most people finish their into menopause by 51, but I was almost 53. Mm-hmm. So but 10 years of, like you said, horror shows and like murder scenes of periods with huge clots and disgusting, gross stuff. And
even if wild. You're probably like, even if you're somebody who's not, I'm not easily grossed out by my own.
Me neither.
Right? I wasn't easily grossed out by my own period, but even then, there's still something shocking. And for me, there was something still a little bit like disconcerting about seeing this, like, my body didn't used to do that, you know, and it is doing some things. And every time I think we've hit the stage where like, that's the most of what it's doing, then, you know, some entire cow liver falls out of my legs, whatever. And totally. Like, what is happening here? Right. So, and, you know, but for me, there was like all the usual suspects, like the PCOS and endometriosis and, you know, and do you have fibroids? Like, I had some fibroids and they kept telling me like, yeah, but they're not in a place that should be causing this heavy bleeding, or, you know, they're not big enough to be causing you as many problems as they're causing. So there was always like sort of a little bit of mystery, and it just, and because of that, there was a long period of like, well, we just want you to get an IUD and see if that works. Or we just want you to have ablation and see what that does. Yeah. And I was really, for people who don't know, ablation is like a procedure where the lining of your uterus is either frozen out or burned out. And it's usually an in-office procedure. It is usually a low-risk procedure, although some of the possible complications can involve like burning through the wall of some other organ, or like there. So like it's very, very low risk that happens, but when it happens, it's pretty frightening. And then there was just like the discussion of what would happen afterwards if if you have the sort of burning kind, then well, for 6 weeks you'll probably you'll have a lot of discharge, and you'll smell things that smell like you've been at a barbecue. And I don't want any part of that, especially if you're telling me that it all just might grow back in a couple of years and I'll be right back where I started. So, and also for me, there was a recommendation that I not have that as an outpatient procedure, that I have that because of my sciatic pain and the difficulty I would have, like sort of staying in position to have that as an outpatient procedure, that I be anesthetized and have it as an inpatient procedure. Well, if we're doing all that during COVID, we might as well do the surgery, right? Yeah. So that's how we kind of made our way. It was like sort of a long winding road from, this seems a little unusual. Oh, this is actually pretty usual for a lot of people who have uteruses, but it is still an inconvenience. This is more than an inconvenience. How can I work and manage my life at this level of bleeding? Now I'm anemic. Now we're going to get, really get more serious about this.
Tigress, one question.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Murphy, you go first and then I'll go after you.
I was just going to ask, from the start of really working with your medical team to when you actually had the procedure, how long did you have to advocate for yourself to have the actual hysterectomy?
I got lucky because once I got the team that I've been working with since I moved to Arizona, they were pretty they listened to me a lot. I mean, I think the first doctor was sort of like, you should just have an ablation. It's not worth that other stuff. And the next doctor who looked at my records and talked to me, we were doing video calls by that point, but then that doctor was very much like, I think the right choice for you might just be to have the surgery. So for me, more of the waiting time had to do with COVID and timing and hospital availability than it had to do with fighting with doctors. Gotcha. There was a little bit at first of this is not something that's killing you, so just live with it. But once I hit the first doctor who was like, no, this is a very serious, life altering thing for you, even if your life is not in immediate danger, this is the way that this is impacting your life. And I, especially because I do also have chronic pain. So the sort of my sleep was being affected because I was bleeding so much that I was having to get up so often to change. But the last period that I had, the only reason I did not just spend the heaviest day just literally sitting on the toilet was because my sciatic pain would not allow for that. Yeah. Otherwise I would have, because by my last period, I was sleeping in a diaper with an overnight pad in the diaper, on a puppy pad, on a towel, and still bleeding through stuff onto my, clothing and bedding and stuff. And so, I'd been wearing adult diapers for months. I had sort of developed that pad in a diaper procedure because pads are a lot less expensive than the diapers. If you are a larger person who's considering using diapers as backups, I will tell you that I wear size in quote unquote women's fashion size 26, 28, or sometimes 30, 32 underwear, and a double extra large in most mainstream diaper brands still works for me, because and I'm very belly heavy, for people who are thinking about whether that would work for them. And I was really lucky to have another friend who is very belly heavy say, girl, if it can fit my apple, it'll fit your apple, kind of thing. So I know that your mileage might vary for different body types, but all of that to say, that's not anything. I don't know how I would have been working if I had not I was bleeding like that during COVID. So I was working from home when I was working. So I could do things like just sit on a black towel and change my clothes all day and run to the bathroom all day. But right before my COVID layoff, the last serious conversation I had with my boss before that layoff was just listen, people around here seem real interested in how many breaks I take. And I'm going to tell you, my first few months working here, the worst days have always fallen on the weekend or on a federal holiday or something. But coming up next month, I'm going to be in the bathroom at least once every 45 minutes, or else you're going to have to replace my chair. And she was just like, why don't you use my executive bathroom? Like, just work in my office those days where you're next to a bathroom. And then COVID shifted everything, and I ended up being laid off and working from home during those like next few months when all of the heaviest days were going to fall during the work week. I don't know how I would have been able to continue to work, especially in a workplace without an understanding supervisor, or, because even once you're at the point where like even diapers aren't working, you have to have break time. You have to be able to do that. So that was why, I had a pretty feminist gynecologist as part of the team of gynecologists that I was working with. And I think that probably helped move things along.
Yeah.
I have one question and one thing to add about the diapers. I'm larger than Tigress in that my weight is around my lower tummy, thighs, and hips. And I also found some diapers that work. So I will definitely put that brand in the notes. And I found it through a group I think that we all belong to called Caring for Our Fat Bodies on Facebook. And I just asked, so who's found a diaper? Because I'm consistently a size 30 pants. So I'm like, all my weight's right down there. And I found these diapers that were actually even a little big for me, which is lovely because they're so comfortable. I was like, oh, I could get used to this. It's really nice. But then the question I wanted to ask you was, what was your diagnosis before? Like, did they say you have endo? Did they say you said you had some polyps?
They said fibroids, and I had, okay. There were fibroids that they could see on all of my ultrasounds. I'd had several ultrasounds, because the first time I had a really serious incident of like super heavy bleeding, I actually went to the ER because I wasn't sure what was going on. I hadn't been having that kind of bleeding, and I was, and I had a sort of public disaster with a menstrual cup because I was in a public restroom, and it was full, even though I had just emptied it, 30 minutes ago at the last public restroom or whatever, and I dropped it, and it just it was like a murder. I mean, it was just like a murder scene, like blood all over. Like I had to have them close the bathroom down, kind of thing. And then, even with all of that, like my friend ran and bought some I just stayed there. My friend ran and bought some pads and underwear and whatever. And even with all that, by the time we got to the car, I was bleeding through those next things. So I called an advice nurse for my insurance, and they told me to go to the ER, that it was probably perimenopause related, but it was better to be safe than sorry. So that was my first vaginal ultrasound. And from that time, they could see fibroids, but it was always, these fibroids are not like, I would hear from other people about like, these doctors would say things to me like, well, once I removed a fibroid the size of a basketball from and mine were like tiny, like mine were really tiny to be causing so much havoc. And where they were was, doctors kept telling me, this is not a place where they should be causing you this much havoc.
Right.
Once they actually removed my uterus, it was more enlarged than they had seen on the ultrasound. And the fibroids were bigger than what they thought they were. But even so, like there are lots of people who have much larger fibroids and they have a lot more pain than I had, but they don't have the kind of bleeding I had. So everybody's just kind of different.
Now, Merf, you have endometriosis, right?
I do. I have endometriosis and polycystic ovarian syndrome.
PCOS.
And hearing Tigress describe what you've experienced is where I'm headed. So I most recently, when you said cow liver, I was like, holy shit, somebody else has experienced this too, because I just recently bled out, and I'm fully anemic now. I'm to the point where I almost need to have a transfusion, and a clot came out of me that was the size of my palm and ran down my leg, and I was just like, what the fuck? Like it was terrifying. And I'm getting, on the flip side of that, a lot of like, first of all, no one is going to allow you to have a hysterectomy because you're too young and you're still of childbearing age. So you may change your mind, even though you've said you don't want kids. We're going to assume that you may change your mind, so you're not going to be able to do that.
But Merf, what if you just got your husband's permission? Would that help?
Yeah, I know. If I just had a 10-day waiting period and got him to sign off on it. Exactly. So, I love
Okay,
that you
but can
have it.
we just time out there for a second? Because you may
Yeah.
have some listeners who just think you're kidding about that, but there actually are procedures around
It's so
female
fucked up.
reproductive organs that, especially getting your tubes tied, that will not be performed by any medical team if you are under a certain age. And if you are partnered, do require you to have a legal document from your spouse giving their permission.
Yep.
So for people who don't know that wasn't just like us kind of being smartasses about that,
Right,
that's for real.
That's legit. Yep.
Frightening.
I'm sorry for interrupting.
It's okay.
No, not at all.
Good.
And it's just it's so comforting in my position to I haven't had a hysterectomy. I desperately want one because I can see that's where I'm headed, and I'm having so many problems medically because I need it out of me and I don't want it in me anymore because I have all those issues. And I still continue. I got the ablation talk, I got the IUD talk, and I'm not going to let it go. I'm going to continue to bang the drum. But it's just so comforting to know that other people are experiencing this and that there are resources available. Because honestly, if you had asked me 3 or 4 months ago, I would have just been like, I'm screwed because I'm fat and there's never going to be an option, to have an adult diaper that fits me or have these things, and we shouldn't have to think that way.
Yeah.
It's really
I want to mention another resource group. Crystal mentioned the Caring for Our Fat Bodies group on Facebook. On Facebook, there is also a group called Fat Positive and Queer Positive Perimenopause. And it is gender inclusive. And it includes people from, people who've had hysterectomies, who've had partials, who've had ablations, who've done none of those things, who are trying natural remedies, who are just living with it. It includes a wide variety of people, and some people are just living with it. And I was, the one of the positive side effects for me of being laid off during the pandemic was that meant that I was on government insurance. Mm-hmm. And so I was, now part of what, so that meant that I didn't have to worry about coverage to get this done. I didn't have a choice in doctors. I got lucky with doctors. But one of the things that it did mean for me was I worked with a medical team who worked with a lot of fat people, because when you work in a low-income clinic in predominantly Black and Latinx areas, there's a greater propensity of higher weight folks in those areas and in that socioeconomic class. So for all of the complicated social reasons, or maybe not that complicated, racism, reasons why, all those folks are in the same place at the poor people's clinic, which I, was and am. But what that meant for me was that I had a surgeon who'd worked on a lot of fat bodies. Whereas if I'd been out at, one of the suburban Scottsdale hospitals or something, I might've been the first fat person they were ever considering working on. And so my surgeon was very confident and was actually super reassuring about, because I ask very direct questions about body size related stuff. I don't want to hear bullshit about BMI, but I do want to hear where your bullshit about BMI is going to get in the way of me doing what I need to do, right? Mm-hmm. So is there a cutoff for this anesthesia? Because the pain doctor had a cutoff for me to get these shots I needed because of the anesthesia. Do you have that here? My doctor was like, do you honestly think you're the fattest person I've ever worked with? Know, and so, and I was just really lucky that way, that he was very matter of fact about body size, and so was the anesthesia team at the hospital where I had my procedure. They were just, to them, it was just a non-issue, the way it should be in everyone's medical treatment, right? Yeah. It should be. I've had experience working with these various kinds of bodies, so yours is just another one of various kinds of bodies. And I was very, very lucky in that way, but it was this sort of the surprise twist of being at a low income clinic.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm privileged, right? I am articulate and articulate in English as a first language. I am a brown person. I'm a light-skinned brown person. I'm a highly educated person who is not intimidated by people with medical degrees. Right. So I go into the space and who's like packed, armed with information about what their bias is about all the things I am: fat, childless, middle-aged, brown, all the things, right? I go in well informed about all of those things. So advocating for myself looks a little different than it can look for other patients. And if you are not that person and you are not in the middle of a pandemic where they won't let you take someone with you, take someone like me with you, because even as that person with all those privileges going into those spaces, when it's you still can have some nervousness about it, or you can forget things because you're thinking about the other questions you had or whatever. And so if you can take an advocate with you, I highly recommend that too. Crystal, did you get to do that, or were you too deep in pandemic times to take anyone?
To your point, Tigress, about you having been ready and you have found your voice, also I found my voice and I was ready as well. So I had my armor, my fat person armor on, ready to pounce when anybody ever mentioned anything to me. But the thing is, nobody said anything to me for a really long time, till like an hour before my surgery. And I was questioning them. So I was like, nobody's questioning me. I was kind of worried because that's not typical. But yeah, I can get into that in a minute, but it was when the person was taking my blood pressure and I was like, oh Lord, I had to educate everybody around the bed. But I'm lucky to have found that. But no, I had to go in alone. And actually we were right before a surge of COVID. So they didn't let me spend the night. And my boyfriend's like, are you sure? I think you should spend the night. So they said, no, you have to go home. We don't want you in the hospital with all the COVID people. So I had to go alone, but it was fine. I was fine. I'm 54. I have some thick ass skin now. I've been fat since the 3rd grade.
The way that COVID impacted my surgical experience was I did finally get to have surgery during a time when my surgery was scheduled at a time when things were low, and then things spiked, but I was already on the schedule, so I got to keep my date. But part of what it meant was that when I came into recovery, I had some oxygen problems during the surgery. And so I needed to be on a BiPAP when I came out of the surgery, and my surgeon did believe, like, there was nothing else in my medical history that said I would definitely have that problem. I do have sleep apnea, and some people with sleep apnea do experience some of the oxygen problems, but they usually even right out. I was on what is called I think it's Trundleberg table, and they were gonna do a robot surgery. I know Crystal, you have a robot surgery story too, but they were gonna do a robot surgery with me, a different procedure than the one Crystal was doing, but similar. And they put you on this tilt table, and when they tilt you, a lot of people, especially people who have sleep apnea, can see a drop in their blood oxygen. And what normally happens is when they tilt you back, you even right back out. And I didn't even back out for so long that they had to actually stop all the procedures and have the anesthesiologist monitor me for a while. And they really believed that that was a result of me having had COVID just a few months earlier.
That's right. You had just gotten over it.
There was nothing else, like even the sleep apnea didn't indicate that I shouldn't even back out. My surgeon had never seen anything like it. So they attributed that to COVID. And then when I had to be in the recovery area after surgery, I was in one of those like crappy recovery beds for a super long time before I actually got a room, because the hospital was so full. And when they finally moved me into a room, the person next to me in the recovery area was just like sobbing and in terrible, terrible pain. And she had just had a mastectomy. Excuse me. And I wanted to give her my bed because it was the last bed in the hospital. They wouldn't let her have it because she needed to be in the cancer wing. So those are the ways that COVID, other than the surgery delays because of the scheduling stuff, those are the ways that COVID impacted me. But I ended up having a full incision surgery. So I had I have the sort of like classic, I don't even have the like bikini C-section looking scar or whatever.
Oh, the little one?
The classic, like I call it the Frankenstein, No,
smiley face.
I don't have the smiley face. I have a straight line down the middle of my my belly button, down to the top of my fupa. Yes. down to the top of my pubic area. So, so I had, so I had I have that scar, which I'm
Did they just, so it was, okay. I was always interested why they didn't do the robot surgery, but it sounds like there was a lot of good reasons.
Because at my hospital, they only do it through that Trundleberg method where they have you on the table, and I couldn't stay on the table long enough.
Yeah, I get it now. Yeah.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
But what was your robot one? So you had a really different experience with the surgery itself than I did, and with the setting.
Yeah. I'm always curious why were you and I just approved, not like immediately, but like without much debate about our weight, to have our hysterectomies when other people can't get their knee surgeries and their hip replacements unless they're under a certain BMI and all that other bullshit. That never came up for me, and it sounds like that really didn't come up for you either until you brought it up.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think some of it was that it seems like you and I had some luck of the draw involved in who we had as our actual medical teams.
Maybe.
Because certainly there are other people who have dealt with doctors who suggested that they lose weight before they could have surgery, or you'd be safer, or you'll be more comfortable, or your recovery will be easier, or whatever. I mean, some of it, I think, is that you and I probably both go into the space like, I'm not here to talk about weight loss. I'm here to talk about you doing something with the body I have right now.
Right. Yeah.
In a way that a lot of other patients aren't there yet on their journey of self-advocacy around size stuff. So when the first doctor says, well, your bleeding might not be as heavy if you lost some weight because fat stores estrogen. And so maybe then they go, oh, I should try to lose some weight. Whereas I might have had some of those thoughts in the background, but I'm also still gonna ask you to tell me what you would tell the person who wasn't my size.
Mm-hmm.
I only want to hear about my complications that have to do with my weight if they're actual practical complications. Like, I can't lay upside down on this table because my belly is too big. Then I want you to tell me if there are other alternatives for what kind of table there is, or like I want to do that kind of practical stuff. But for so many patients, a combination of personal shyness, modesty, intimidation about the medical system, and internalized fat phobia can all be part of the reason why when the very first person says anything about weight, they go, oh, that person must be right, instead of, oh no, we're going to do a different thing. Hi, let me introduce you to a different kind of patient today.
Yes, you're going to get a new religion today.
I actually, I had my surgery in because I was at a county hospital, that is a teaching hospital. So that means I'm not just working with my surgeon and my gynecologist, I'm working with like 1,700 approximately people who come in and out of this room to learn something from the science experiment of me. I am fine with that. I'm not shy about people seeing my, because I would just tell people, well, Crystal knows because I used to model in her lingerie fashion show.
That's right, yeah.
Everybody see my booty, go ahead, And so I'm not shy about those kind of things, especially in a medical setting, but also in a sexy time setting, big sexy chat. And so I don't care about the other people being around or who saw the inside of when you cut me open, whatever. I don't care about any of that. And I'm happy to engage with these people who are learning. And so what happened is I had actually an undergraduate medical pre-med student who was doing some kind of summer internship thing at the hospital and who just came into the room at like 5 a.m. while I was in recovery to check my vitals, because he's got to practice, checking my vitals. But they had introduced me to him, so I knew he had been in the observation area during my surgery. So I was like, have you ever heard of the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance? And I'm a different kind of patient than you might be used to. Let me tell you about this. And then engaged him in dialogue around things like, many of your listeners might not know this, but like most medical students do not ever practice on a cadaver that is fat.
Never.
Because there is no medical school in the country that accepts higher weight cadavers. And it has to do with the logistics around embalming a cadaver, which is different than embalming a corpse, and like that makes it like 100 pounds heavier, and then we're gonna have to move these around, and blah blah blah. Excuse.
Right.
And what that means is fat people cannot donate their bodies to science,
So
and therefore
pisses me
medical
off.
students never practice on fat bodies. But like walking this undergraduate medical student through that and watching them be like, wait, what do you mean? You know, and I'm like, and now give me my painkillers and I'm going to go back. I'm this duty from my surgical, you know, post-op bed, and now I'm going to go back to sleep. But it was like, part of what I was able to say to him was, you got to observe a physician who didn't do any of the things to me that I know through my activism get done to fat patients all the time. And you may not know how rare that is, but I know how rare it is. So please take that learning, apply it to everything that you become as a doctor, and share it out with your classmates and colleagues, right?
Do better.
Do better. Do better. Crystal, did you have students in your procedure?
No. Not that I know of. I had some assholes, though, but I'll tell you about them in a minute.
Okay, yeah, let me stop talking so we can hear your surgery story.
Merf, I don't remember. I remember that we talked about Tigress's role at NAFA before we started recording. Did I mention that she is not here for work reasons or this reason that she's part of the NAFA organization? But did I say that when we did it the second time? Nope. I don't think so. Yeah, okay. So for people who don't know what NAFA is, Tigress is the national chair of NAFA, which is NAAFA.org online, and it's called the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. And they do so much great work, and we'll definitely put them in the notes. And Tigress is a part of that organization. And you have been for a couple of years now, right, Tigress? I mean, I've been
the board chair for a couple of years. I've been on the board since 2014, and for a few years before that, I did some fashion stuff at the NAFA conferences through my nightclub event. Right. But I've been the board chair for about 2 years, and so I was the board chair when I had this surgery. And so just as I am not officially here as the NAFA board chair, I was not officially a hysterectomy patient as the NAFA board chair. But while I'm here, let me tell you,
exactly.
My young intern friend about
right.
Because that's just what, we, all of us who are activists and advocates should have permission to turn that off when we need to in order to manage our lives.
For sure.
And also, sometimes I don't want to turn it off if I've got the bandwidth to do that advocacy, especially in such a unique situation.
Very.
If I've got the bandwidth, I want to do it so that someone else who doesn't have the bandwidth doesn't have to. Or the next time I don't have the bandwidth, somebody's already did some of that learning and teaching, So, we just, we had a little bit of NAFA hiatus while I was recovering, because I was, if I'd had the robot surgery, I would have had a few days of recovery.
Yeah.
But with the full incision surgery, it really was more like, they said 4 to 6 weeks recovery. I had other people, especially other large bellied people, talk to me about like, really, that might look more like 2 months. So really prepare for that.
Sure.
And take it easy. One of the best things that happened to me was, well, you had gone through your surgery already. So I had you as but also other people in fat activist community were just so generous with sharing the details of their experiences and their learnings around recovery. Like, try getting out of bed this way, or think about getting, there was a lot of discussion around like binders or girdles or things like that to do after the surgery to help with recovery and healing. And I ended up learning from, another leader in fat community. I think it was Rabbi Amina from Fat Torah, who was like, what about a plus size pregnancy band? Because that might be more comfortable. I couldn't get into a binder because of my chronic pain, but I could get into a plus size pregnancy band.
Smart.
Well, I wasn't thinking, as a person who just had all the pregnancy parts removed, let me get some pregnancy swag to go along with my recovery, And those kinds of like best practices and tips and stuff were just invaluable.
That's wonderful.
My surgery was definitely easier, and my recovery was easier because I talked specifically to other people with diverse bodies about it.
It helps big time. Where should I start, Merf?
I was going to say, so Crystal, it sounds like there was some time to prep, and there was some information given to Tigress ahead of time to really kind of prepare. Did you have that same experience?
No, only because I was asked on a Tuesday if I want to have a hysterectomy on Thursday. So I was like, yes, let's do it. But my situation is a little bit different, why I got to this point. And I was doing the math when Tigress was speaking earlier. I started my period at 12, and I had it until I was 52 when I had my hysterectomy, almost 53. So 40 years of a cycle, most of the time bleeding every 28 days, lots of times where I didn't bleed at all. And then at the end, murder scene after murder scene after murder scene for the perimenopause years. Good times. So I had a little cancer. I'm cancer free now. It was just a real strange thing. I accidentally got pregnant, didn't know it. I had a miscarriage, didn't know it. And then it just all started going really, really quickly. So I had 2 days to get ready for a hysterectomy, and I had to go get COVID testing and get an ECG and EKG and all this stuff done. So there was no time to really think about it. I just knew that I didn't want to, I knew it just had to go, and I didn't want to wait any longer. So if they could get me in on Thursday, and she said, I want to get you in before the COVID surge. And I said, okay, let's just do it. And I was off because of the pandemic. So my business was shut down. And so I was like, yeah, this is a great time. So let's just do it. And so I did it. And it was, pretty good actually situation for me, but I have good insurance thanks to my partner. He works for the county. So I have Kaiser. Afterwards, Kaiser told me that surgery would have been about $90,000 out of pocket, but I had great insurance, so it only cost me my copay, $20, which is pretty amazing. And they did the Da Vinci robot on me. So, but they did tell me that ahead of time. So of course I was on Google and YouTube looking up, what is the Da Vinci robot? It's basically, apparently it's technology that was developed here in the Bay Area, and it's designed to have a type of surgery where there's just very little incisions, things that just are going to heal more quickly. Where, like, I had a gallbladder removed about 20 years ago. They did those 3 little cuts on my tummy and 1 through my belly button, and that's all that has to heal, really. Of course, you have internal healing. I had a full hysterectomy. Tigress, what kind did you leave an ovary?
I left both ovaries. And I learned actually, because when I went to sign some paperwork and it was like, you're having a full hysterectomy. I always thought full meant all the parts. Full means all of the uterus. Radical means all of the parts.
I had a radical. Thank you.
I was like, I'm not having a full. I mean, like, I'm not. They told me I get to keep my. What are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
But it was because if you're keeping just the ovaries, but your whole uterus is being removed. And I also had my cervix removed and fallopian tube. So all I kept was the ovaries, but I kept
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have nothing. And a new cervix. I always say I have a new vagina. Low mileage. It's only a year and a half old. But
I'm just imagining a used car salesman slapping
exactly
the cervix and being like, yes. This baby's brand new.
Low miles.
Right, low miles.
Yeah. And it's different too, because I think you might know this already, Tigress, but once they remove your cervix, it's no longer called a vaginal canal. It's called a cuff or a vault.
Yeah, I asked them, I was like, all right, so I need to know about this cuff, because they kept referring to the cuff at the end, right? They stitch up the end of your vagina. And my gynecologist told me that, like, historically, they just left that open. So it was just like opening into your body cavern, right? So now they do what they call a cuff, where it's like a tiny fold over and they stitch that up, right? Yep. But what I was imagining in my head was like the cuff of like a men's dress shirt, right? Like a cuff. I'm doing it on screen like your listeners can hear me.
Like we can all see, yeah.
About that length of, and so I was like, so how much depth of vagina did I lose because they made this cuff at the end? And she's like, no. It's like an eighth of an inch, if that.
Right. Yeah.
So I didn't lose any depth. So here's the sexy time talk. Like, I didn't lose any depth. I had, so many people worry about, if I have to have a hysterectomy, what is that going to mean in terms of sex, in terms of hormones, in terms of all that. I kept my ovaries. So for me, the sort of like sex drive things and all of that stuff are all still where they would have been, how they would have been going along with my chronology anyway. But the night before my surgery, why I was still looking up stuff the night, like I'm looking at stuff that I've mostly already read. Right. And all of a sudden I come across like some website that says something like, well, probably if you're keeping your ovaries, everything will be the same. But if you are a person whose orgasm is very connected to your to your uterus convulsing, then that might really change the intensity of your orgasms. And I was like, I mean, am I? Like, I had to like really, I'm like laying there the night before my surgery thinking like, how much does my uterus convulse? My uterus, right? Like, I know how much my vaginal walls do things, right?
Sure.
But I wasn't trying to control my uterus my whole life. I don't know how much it convulses in there, right? And so like, I was like, what does this mean? And so I was, until the first time that I did have sex after my surgery, I was very much like, what if I find out now that all these years that I was, so that I was, so orgasmic or whatever, that was all, the uterus was doing all the heavy lifting,
right.
And now it's gone, right?
Yeah.
For me, that recovery, that piece, everything fell into place, so to speak.
Okay.
But I do know though, like I don't want to take that lightly though, because I know how much that, first of all, traumatizes people it does happen to, and also slows some people down in getting the medical care that they need because they are worried about how that's going to affect them or their partner or whatever, right? And so that piece is really, and my doctor was really upfront before I even asked any questions about this. Like, you might have some questions about this, let me just tell you.
That's
great. And I was really grateful for that, because I had very much grown up with those sort of myths around
you're going to dry up. You're going to be like the Sahara Desert.
You're going to, right. A woman is ruined once she's had
forever.
that, or she's worthless once she's had that surgery or whatever. And like, I'd heard that kind of language around me growing up. Older women, or even my mom had a hysterectomy relatively young, which is part of why we didn't know what perimenopause was going to look like for me. And I'd heard those kinds of things around me in the sort of hushed tones of like women talking, even though the kids are around or whatever. And the things you weren't supposed to hear the grown-ups saying about so-and-so's, the reason so-and-so's husband cheated on her is because once she had that surgery, she just wasn't the same, or like that kind of shit. That's like, there can be elements of that experience to what actually happens to people, but the fact that we talk about it in those sort of discarding ways instead of tones, with compassion or with resource sharing to figure out how to make it better for those people, or like any of that stuff, there was a little bit of that anxiety around it for me.
Absolutely. Well, I think that whole sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think there's a little bit of a lag.
Sorry. No, I'm sorry. One of the things my doctor did say to me was like, you might find, and many women actually do find, that even though they thought sex was going to be worse after they had it, it's actually better. You don't have to worry about pregnancy anymore. You don't have to worry about whether you're going to get your period. If you're somebody who was bleeding like I was bleeding, like I used to refer to my period as The Shining because of that scene when the elevator opens up. And
yes.
Right. Nobody feels sexy when that's happening.
No.
If that's your kink, go ahead.
That's fine.
What you do, fine, right? Not mine. So let me not say nobody. I did not feel sexy, feeling like if I opened my legs, The Shining was going to happen, right? And so there was like, that's part of what my doctor was reassuring me about.
Yeah.
So, you won't have to worry about that element anymore. And it's I still have, like, Chris, I don't know if you do this, but like I still sometimes will, like, I'll be in Target and I'll be like, what am I forgetting? Oh, I need to get, right? And I'll go down to the OB and then I'll be like, I do not need to get right? It doesn't happen very often, but every once in a while I still have that because you live with it for so many years as part of your life.
I think I have like the ghost feeling of like, maybe I'm getting ready to get cramps and I'm like, oh no, that must be something different because there's nothing in there. So I had the radical, by the way. I had everything, including my cervix. And I was inverted on the table for 3.5 hours while I was sedated for my surgery. And then my vagina assisted with the delivery of all my bits. So everything came out through my vagina, all of it. And then they took care of closing the cervix up, and then no sex for 10 weeks after that. But I don't take any hormones because it was a tiny little bit of cancer. It was called choriocarcinoma. It was very complicated. We had to send my kit and caboodle off by FedEx to Johns Hopkins. 2 Kaiser hospitals, looked at it. Then they sent it off to Johns Hopkins for another opinion. And then we had a fourth opinion from Stanford that I paid for. And then, yeah, so it was complicated, but thankfully the cancer was only in my body. It was like 2 millimeters. So it was in and out pretty quickly. And so far, so good. I'm on surveillance now, but they give me a PET scan like twice a year. And that's the one that looks at everything. It's the neatest test ever. And so far, so good. And it was basically because I got pregnant. You shouldn't get pregnant at the age of 52. We weren't trying. We blamed the pandemic because what else are you going to do? You know, you can only do so many puzzles, right? So like, want to have sex again? Sure. So yeah. It's not, I had a molar pregnancy, if that means anything to anybody. But since then, as far as I like a lot of sex. I have a lovely partner who I like to have a lot of sex with. I am not taking any hormones because of the cancer. They were worried that the cancer can grow from hormones. As we all know, hormones are running the whole show. Everything that you're doing in a day is all run by hormones. And they took my ovaries out. And for the first time in my life, after my hysterectomy, I had my first hot flash. I was like, oh, this is what it feels like. So I'd never had one. And then they lasted for about a month. And then I haven't had one since. And I'm not taking any hormones. And my sex life is fantastic again. Waiting 10 weeks was tricky. Actually, I had to wait like 10 and a half weeks because my friend said, we were in Las Vegas to visit my family. And she's like, could you guys just wait a few more days until you're back in Kaiser country? I was like, bitch. Because then she got in my head, and I was like, fuck, she's right. Because Las Vegas is not Kaiser country. So
you just wanted to be close to your medical professionals in case anything.
She was right, that bitch. But I was like emailing my doctor, could we have anal sex? No. I'm like, oh. So we figured stuff out, how to have some fun. But anyway, it was so, but everything's fine now. I don't have any issues with desire, but I've always been a person that likes a lot of sex, so maybe that helps. I know, but some people it does affect their desire. I don't have any issues with lubrication, but when I do, sometimes it happens, people, I just use good lube, the store-bought kind. And so far, everything seems to be pretty normal. I did.
Have you guys already had a lube episode of your Big Sexy Talk show? Because I feel like there's a lot of like vaginal dryness shaming, and
there is
sort of like, God bless WAP because that song slaps, but also that song reinforces the idea that there's something like inherently better about natural lubrication than if you need some kind of other lubrication. And like, if you need some kind of other lubrication, just
no shame. And guess what?
Find your favorite, work it out.
Yes. Sometimes it makes sex way better. But what I used to say when I did all those home parties, look, there have been times when I've been really turned on and super dry. And then I've been really wet at certain times when it wasn't like all that. And I'd be like, don't get all excited. I'm not that turned on. Just my body defies me. And it's just wet right now, but nothing you're doing is really that special because, sometimes it just wasn't. But then other times I'd be, it just, there's no rhyme or reason. So there's a reason why they make lubricant, because all of us have issues at some point or another. And also if you have a really good lube, we talked about this already, didn't we, Merf? Lube a little bit. If you have that really good silicone lube, oh man, it takes like your Honda, Toyota sex to like Rolls Royce sex, even if you're already wet on your own. So don't shame people for how wet they get or not, and don't shame people for using lubricants. There's some really good ones out there. And remind me which one you love, Merf.
Millennium.
That's right, Millennium ID, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So I did want
Millennium lube.
I wanted to mention where I did get a little bit of fat phobia during my surgery. So Kaiser, they sometimes have a reputation for a lot of medical fat phobia. But I didn't run into it too much for all this whole situation. For other things I have. But when I first got to check in to the hospital, how when you see another fat person out in the wild and you're like, I see you. You look so cute. I love your outfit. Even if you're just saying it with your eyes, right? I getting ready to get checked in, and the lady was checking me in. Big girl. I was like, okay, yes, she sees me. I see her. This is going to be great. And then I get into her office, and she has this little baby chair for me to sit in. I was like, I go, can I have another chair? My butt's not going to fit in there. Oh, we don't have any other chairs. You don't have any other chairs?
In this whole building.
And she had like one of those $500 ergonomic chairs. I was like, she's like, just stand. You're gonna be laying down for a long time soon anyway.
Hell of ableist.
Right? I go, yeah, that's true. But I don't know is this going to take a half an hour? I can't stand here for half an hour like this. And she's like, well, I don't know what we're going to do. And I'm like, okay, I need a chair. So we had some person try to find us a chair and they found me something. But anyway, I was like so disappointed from this other fellow fat babe. And she's like, just stand there. Not everybody can stand there for 20 or 30 minutes, and that's not okay. It is very ableist. So that was my little first bit. And I was like, damn, it was going so well. And then nobody questioned whether my BMI or weight was too high. According to Kaiser's typical response, they're both too high, but they didn't bring it up. So I finally was like, do we need to talk about my weight? Because, they can see how fat I am, but they never brought it up. But then when I got to the room where they do the surgery prep, they tried to put me in one of those little tiny beds. So I was like, maybe they just need me to sit here for a little while. But then I asked one of the nurses, how long am I going to be in this bed? Oh gosh, until you have surgery, probably like 6 hours. I was like, oh, well, no, this bed's not going to work. We're going to have to find a bariatric bed. Well, she had all these excuses. I go, look, I can't lay in that bed for 6 hours. It doesn't even fit me. And she was so annoyed, I have to go find a bed. Yeah, you do.
Yes, you do.
I mean, it's like my whole ass is hanging off both sides of the other bed. So that took a little while. And then it was time to really start getting prepped for surgery. And I think you probably remember this, Tigress, but there's a lot of people in your room asking you questions. One person's taking your blood pressure. Another person's checking something else. They're putting the pulse thingy on you. And of course, the lady's trying to take my blood pressure with a small, regular size, whatever they call it, cuff. No. And I go, oh, you know what? My blood pressure is going to show up really high if you keep using that cuff. And she's like, well, let me just do it. So she does. And of course, I'm like, I told you it's going to be high. We'll just get one of those large cuffs out of the drawer. And you know what was bothering her? The bags are sealed around the cuff.
Okay, like, well, open it up.
I mean, like 50 cents. Okay, we're talking of plastic. I go, well, just go ahead and use that bigger one. It works better. No, let me try again. I go, it's gonna come out high. And you're making my blood pressure higher, by the way. And I said, no, I need the big cuff. If I use the big cuff, if you use the large cuff on me. And she said, well, your arms aren't that fat. I go, just telling you, I'm a big person. Please use the larger cuff. I have much better results. She tries it a third time. I go, okay, this is ridiculous, So she finally rolls her eyes, whatever. She gets out the larger cuff and she starts doing. I'm like, can I have everybody's attention in the room here real quick? Just want to let you know, anytime you get a person of size in here, just use the larger cuff, okay? Don't argue with them. It's really just not that big of a deal. Just take another cuff out of the wrapper and just do it. And they're all looking at me, but I'm like, I need everybody to hear me here in this room. You guys all listen, just in case someone comes behind me that's not as loudmouth as I am, and just can't advocate for themselves. It's such bullshit. And I asked for it like 3 or 4 times. It just didn't have to be like that. So I was pissed. But I finally went in to the room. I was sedated. Well, not before I got sedated. Everybody comes in. All the surgeons come and check in with you, right? So then the anesthesiologist came in. Really lovely person. She's like, hi, how's it going? We're really excited. We're ready for you. I go, okay, I'm waiting. Like, aren't you going to give me a lecture? What do you mean? I'm like, about my weight. Is this dangerous? No, I keep fat people alive all the time. That's my job. And that's it. I go,
that's
man. I was ready. I was like, come on, bring on. And nothing. She's like, no, that's what I do. It's my job to keep fat people alive.
And and that's what we learn. Like every time somebody successfully has a medical procedure, what we learn is it can be done. Mm-hmm. And if there's like a risk analysis that we need to do, like, it's 5% more dangerous at your weight than it is what I want you to tell me that so I can make an informed decision. I don't want you to just tell me no.
Right. And let me just say my numbers too. At the time I was 350 pounds. I'm 5'7". And usually when I'm at Kaiser, I do get a lot of lectures and, don't you want to have weight loss surgery? Don't you want to go on a diet? And I finally just said, could you guys just put it in my folder that I don't want to be asked about weight loss surgery again. And I'm not going to go on a diet just so I don't have to go through this every time. But yeah, when I was getting ready to have this surgery, nobody gave 2 hoots about it. They're just like, yeah, let's come on in. and I was sedated. I was under for 3.5 hours, and I was inverted. And because of the being inverted, and I do have mild sleep apnea, Tigress, but I guess it's really, really mild. I don't stop breathing so much, but I guess anyway. And I have a CPAP, but they didn't bring it to the hospital with me or anything like that, and I hardly ever use it. I need to use it more often. And there's also another group on Facebook that's really great for people who are fat and use a CPAP or a BiPAP. So we should also put that in the notes. But yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the one. But yeah, I mean, I'm what I call supersized fat person, fat body, and yeah, they just did it and didn't question me at all. I was the one asking them, "Don't you want to question me about my weight?" Like, no, you're good.
I was worried about the anesthesia piece because I had been turned down for some epidural shots that my pain doctor wanted to give me for my sciatica because it was being done at an outpatient surgery center, and the surgery center had a BMI cutoff for anesthesia. And I was like 1 pound under their cutoff or something. And he was like, that means if you show up on the day, you're having any kind of little fluctuation in weight, and you show up on the day, they're not going to give it to you. They're going to cancel your procedure. Wow. And when that happened, and that was a few months before my hysterectomy. And so when that happened, I started doing some research around anesthesia and BMI. And, for the record, once again, I think we've mentioned this, but like, I believe BMI is a totally faulty, made up, problematic, racist tool. And also it is a reality that it's used by the medical system, right? So I was looking to see what information there was about anesthesia and BMI so that I had a better sense of, is this surgery center or is this anesthesiologist overall? And I remember finding some research from the American Anesthesiology Association or some information from them that essentially said, like, we don't really get that much training on fat people.
Right.
And, it's the same thing as everything else, right? It's not that you don't get these things. It's that you don't demand these things. Or like, if you're the American Anesthesiology Association, you should be providing training for anesthesiologists, right? Like, this should be part of the certification process. This should be like, so all of those like big medical things that are outside of our control, no matter how good of an advocate you are for yourself, if you have to have your procedure at a place that has a policy, your choice is try to get yourself small enough to abide by their policy. Try to take legal action against them, which there's not a lot of precedent for and not a lot of success with, or live with whatever your thing is that you're living with, or die with whatever your thing is that you're living with. And it's ridiculous.
It is.
Then you add, you add practitioner bias to it. I was seeing a cardiologist because of some blood pressure spikes I had when I had COVID, and my, GP sent me to a cardiologist for follow-up. And because of that, I had a cardiologist when I needed surgery clearance. But my cardiologist wasn't available on the short notice of like the window of when they told me I needed cardiology clearance to when I had to get it. And so I ended up seeing another cardiologist at that practice who had never seen me before. And so as soon as he walked in the room, I could tell just from the way he looked at me, you have that spidey sense around when somebody is going to have an anti-fat attitude.
Oh yeah.
And I could tell just from the way he looked at me that we were going to have problems. And he looked at my EKG results and declared that I'd had a small heart attack and said to me, if you were telling me you were running 5 miles a day or something like that, I would say that these are faulty results. But when you're telling me that you don't exercise because of your pain, then I'm just going to say that you had a small heart attack, which meant that I had to do a stress test to get clearance for surgery, which was almost got my surgery canceled because of the timing of having to get all that done in time for the surgery. And when I told my surgeon that all that had happened, because it wasn't the surgeon asking for that, it was the hospital's the medical system's requirements that you have to have this sign off by this kind of person and whatever. When I told my surgeon, he was like, I operate on people with much higher blood pressure than you all the time. Plus, the stress test had come up 100% clean. When I followed up with my own cardiologist after surgery, he looked at the same EKG, and I said, when you look at that, do you see a small heart attack? And he said, no, I see somebody who put the sensors in the wrong places to read through your breast tissue. This happens to women all the time.
Shit.
So it was as simple as like, you know, but that was the head of cardiology that looked at me, saw that I was fat, decided that I'd had a heart attack, even though he's looking at exactly the same results as the cardiologist who's been working with me for months.
That's such bullshit.
And so that was one of the places where it showed up. But again, one of the places where I was lucky enough to have a surgeon who said, they are the ones being ridiculous.
Yeah.
You are safe. I have done this. Like, I've done this. I've done this with people larger than you. I've done this with people with higher blood pressure than you. I've done this with people who have, you know, more other health challenges than you.
Yeah.
You are going to be fine. But had I had some other surgeon who was closer to the beginning of their career, or didn't have that kind of experience, or had more cardiology worship as, you know, whatever,
yeah.
I could still be sitting around here shining my way through 8 towels a week, you know? So a lot of it is, I do feel really lucky and blessed for the way that everything went for me.
Yeah.
And as the chair of NAFA and as somebody who's been in activist circles for a long time, you know, you hear a lot of medical discrimination horror stories. Oh, yeah. They don't all end like this.
No.
But you don't hear enough of the ones that do end like this.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I was really lucky and really fortunate, really privileged. Yeah. It was a good experience for me.
There's a weird lag, so sorry. Go ahead, Crystal.
I'm loving being uterus free. Okay. I don't love being uterus free. It's great. And my recovery was wonderful. When I came out of sedation, I was asking for some lumpia because, I mean, who doesn't want lumpia? And they're like, why lumpia? I'm like, I don't know. I want some lumpia fried, something fried and yummy. And I'm really relieved that I did it. I had a period for 40 years. I ruined so many items of clothing, furniture, embarrassed myself in country clubs, bleeding through my pants. I'm fucking over it. So I was so happy to have it all gone. And I've had my recovery was so fast. Literally 2 days after my surgery, I'm like, I'm going to the grocery store. My boyfriend's like, no, you're not. I go, I am. And he said, oh, fine. Then just don't let them pack the bags more than 5 pounds. The coolest thing about having the surgery for me is that for like 6 months, whenever I went grocery shopping, he ran out to the car and got the groceries and unloaded my car. But then after 6 months, that ended.
Keep doing that.
I know.
You have major surgery to have a partner who does that. I'm just saying.
Pretty awesome. I mean, usually I'm kind of like to just be on top of it myself, but I was like, oh, I could get used to this.
Little added
my
bonus.
recovery was longer because I did incision.
Yeah.
And so, and I also had, I did all the things, I followed all the rules, I washed the way I was supposed to wash, all the stuff, and I still got the tiniest opening at the top of my incision. So then we had to be like super on guard for infection, and I did get a little bit of infection. Sure. And I mean, like, I had the tiniest, like, I don't know how this doctor saw this without like the Sherlock Holmes, what do you call those things?
Magnifying glass.
Magnifying glass, yeah. I was like, oh, microscope. But the funny thing is, my doctor, when I had my surgery, I wanted to ask my doctor to take a picture of my uterus, and then I was like, he's going to think I'm a total freak, and I'm not asking.
I wanted to ask too, and that's funny.
So I didn't ask.
I didn't
But
either.
he did. He just read my mind. He took a picture. He was like, I don't know if you want to see this or not, but I took a picture. So he had this picture of my uterus with my cervix next to it. And just because of like, again, going to be a little bit graphic, but like, just because of the configuration of like, it's not like they wiped it down before they took a picture.
Right, yeah.
Like,
wasn't pristine.
Blood on it. And it had a little place where it was stitched, where they had, stitched off the fallopian tubes to cut them or whatever. So there's like this little stitching that formed this little... It looked like a little mouth, and it was like, I thought it looked like a really angry fish, right? One of my friends who likes creepy stuff because she won't be grossed out by seeing this internal organ of mine, and she's like, I'm getting Major Admiral Akbar vibes from this, right? And so we started making Star Wars jokes about Akbar. People who don't know, Admiral Akbar is this creature in Star Wars. He's the "it's a trap" guy from the original Star Wars. And anyway, I said something to the first follow-up gynecologist, because after my surgery, I saw a different gynecologist every time I went back to the hospital for the follow-ups. And so I said something to the first one, and then the next time I go in, the person just walks in the room and is like, so I hear you have a Star Wars uterus, or like, oh, you're the one with the Star Wars uterus or whatever. By the time I'd had 3 or 4 appointments, it was pretty clear that that photo had circulated the hospital, which was, again, fine with me because they're, they're learning. But like all these doctors were having conversations about my gigantic uterus, my big U energy, and my gigantic uterus, my my Star Wars themed uterus or whatever.
I love it.
So
that's awesome.
But it was if I had not had the full incision surgery, there were some questions because of the size of my uterus about, they do this thing where they like put this, if they do it with the robot, then they have to put this like bag in there so they can cut up your uterus inside the bag and then pull the bag out.
Yep.
And there were some questions about whether they would be able to cut it up small enough to pull it out vaginally without causing some like, scratching or tearing or whatever. So the good thing about having the full incision surgery is it meant I had abdominal pain a lot longer, but I didn't have any vaginal pain because nobody had touched my vagina during the whole surgery.
Nice.
So there was that part. That was that, and that made all like bathroom issues afterwards and stuff easier.
Oh yeah, I did have some bathroom issues for a few months, but I always tell people, they send you home with Senecot or whatever, take it and buy some more and take it for a few months and you'll be fine, because you don't want to be bearing down too hard for anything for a while. But that was about it. And Tigress, I don't know if you know this, but Merf and her husband had a Star Wars wedding.
I did not know that. That sounds like a lot of fun.
We had a
more fun than a Star
Wars. Right. Yeah. No, there was no, it's a trap going on there. That's fantastic.
I asked I asked for a photo and she goes, oh, you should have told me sooner, because I didn't ask until afterwards, or like the next day or whatever. And I was like, by the way, can I see it? And she goes, oh, too late. Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that you want me to tell your listeners about this experience, or that you remember, Crystal, when we, compared notes after our 2 experiences? Anything else that you...
So are you having hot flashes or anything like that?
No, I'm not having anything.
Are you taking hormones?
No. What I did have was I had an ovarian cyst this year. So I kept my ovaries because they were pristine. And then shortly after my surgery recovery, I began to develop a little cyst that caused me quite a bit of pain and discomfort for, the months after my surgery. And that it is harder to get people to take seriously, because if it looks like it's probably not, it looks like it's not malignant, and they're like, there's no way it's a malignant tumor this soon after your surgery, because we would have seen signs of that during your surgery. So that was comforting, but that did not help me with the pain I was experiencing.
Right.
So I've been through 3 more vaginal ultrasounds. I thought I would never have to have a vaginal ultrasound again after I had my hysterectomy. And instead, I've been through 3 more vaginal ultrasounds and an MRI to try to make sure that we knew what is really going on in my abdominal area that's causing this pain. And right now, the cyst did go away on itself. So I had a cyst that grew to the size of a chicken egg on my left ovary. And like many of this, I think the term is hemorrhagic. Like many of those kinds of cysts, it did actually go away on its own. But there was a lot of pain and discomfort before that happened. And there was a lot of question about whether it was worth doing surgery when it might go away on its own, and when I've just had recovered from surgery and I'd had the full incision one and all that other stuff. So, and then there was another COVID surge, and so it was probably going to be a waiting list again anyway. And so my ovaries haven't been the most friendly with me since I kept them around, but they are going to make sure I'm aware that they're still there. But my hormones do seem to be working, pretty typically, and I do still have both of them, and I've recovered from that cyst and it's fine. So I feel lucky about that too.
Tigress, did you have to pay out of pocket at all?
No.
Awesome.
I didn't have to pay out of pocket. I was receiving what in Arizona is called access. It's, nice. government healthcare.
That's a beautiful thing.
It's the equivalent of Medi-Cal.
Sure.
But it is also like, that is another thing where like lots of people who were you know, laid off during the pandemic. Like, navigating all of those systems is not easy.
No.
I have a lot of privilege in understanding how to navigate those systems and, you know, what to say to make people do the things I need them to do in a customer service kind of way.
Yeah.
And, you know, and just like all of those pieces around systems management, because of my professional background, my educational background, whatever, I have a lot of privilege in navigating those systems that many other people who are using those resources don't have.
Right.
And that they don't even necessarily, they have difficulty jumping through all the hoops, getting the resources or making sure they keep them, all that kind of stuff.
And, you know, and speaking of that, a lot of times, even I sometimes have executive function issues. And even if you can't bring someone with you, sometimes I have volunteered to help my friends who struggle with the sort of administrative stuff. Let me help you with the forms and the paperwork. Let me, you know, take some of that off of you. So that's another way your friends and allies and family can help out, is if someone could help you just keep track of all the paperwork and all the steps and where you've been and who you've seen, which doctors. Keep it in a notebook, because you think you'll remember, but you won't. Especially once you get into menopause, you won't remember shit. I can't remember words. I have word aphasia since I got instant menopause. But that's another way to have a helper with you.
These days, many people have COVID brain fog and the
pandemic,
things that can get in the way. I mean, one thing I will say that I have learned through helping a few different people navigate medical systems is, if you don't have insurance, or if you are underinsured, or if even with your insurance, your bills are so outrageous that you think you're going to have a heart attack.
Yeah.
When you see them, please do find out what financial aid is available from your hospital system, because a lot of people don't even understand that there's scholarship aid available, or they think they're not poor enough for it. But it actually uses the calculation at most hospitals, maybe all hospitals, is based on where the federal poverty line is, but it's based on percentages. So you can be I've seen people up to 400% of the federal poverty line still get at least some financial aid.
Oh, cool.
And you won't know the answer until you apply. And it might be a pain in the ass process, or it might just be a simple form, you know, but whichever thing it is, like, that is an option for you. And a lot of people just don't even know that exists, that there is financial aid available from hospitals.
Yep.
And so please, 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 if you need to have one of these procedures and you are underinsured or uninsured, you know, please do look at the resources that might be available to you in that way. Don't just be bleeding through everything you own and sitting there in pain because you're worried about the hospital bills later. See what you can do, or see if you have, you know, a friend or loved one who can help you navigate that system.
I have one question for both of you, Merf and Tigress. I have a feeling I know the answer to this. Have you both had a colposcopy? You remember that? Having one of those?
A colposcopy?
Where they go in really quickly, like takes 20 seconds, and they go take a section of your cervix to use for, they do that.
My medical team referred to that as an endometrial biopsy. So I hadn't heard that term. It is one of the most painful things I've ever experienced.
What about you, Merf? Have you had one?
Yes, multiple.
They take a sample of your...
And they put that stuff on it that they say it'll look like coffee grounds, and it's just so gross.
I'm just going to tell people, if you're listening, if you've never had one, you're getting ready to have one, take an 800 Motrin before you go. It just helps a little, take the edge off. It hurts like hell for like 30 seconds, but that was worse than the whole fucking hysterectomy.
I think I agree with that. For me, that you know, biopsy was more painful than recovering from the surgery. I mean, obviously not in terms of longevity, but that moment of, like, when they give you the scale, and my system uses the little frowny and smiley face scale. A lot of you have probably seen that, and it's like, you know, the super happy face at 0, and then at the 10, it's like the face where the frown is so big it's pulling their face off. And I would put the height of that pain at the 10. It's just it's a 10 for a very short amount of time.
Yes.
But I would put it at a 10. I wouldn't put my surgery recovery at a 10, even though I had to deal with it for weeks.
Me too. Same.
It was awful. And the first time I had one, I had to have 2 or 3 of them in the run up to my 2. Yeah, I had to have 2 or 3 of them in the run up to my hysterectomy. And the first time I had one, the doctor was like, I'm gonna he had told me about it, and I don't know if he had understated it or if I had misremembered what he said. But when I come in on the day of and he's like, so you ready for this? And I was like, well, you said it would just be like a pinchy kind of feeling, right? And he was like, I don't think that's what I said. He goes, some women feel like it's not really that big deal and it's just uncomfortable for a minute. And other people have literally asked me how the hell I can give this to someone without anesthetizing them first.
Yeah.
And I seriously wanted to kick him in his face when he actually did.
Yeah.
It was
no
bad.
joke.
And I just sat in the car and cried. And I had driven myself there. I was by myself. I just sat in the car and cried afterwards because it was just I was so shocked by how invasive. And I'm not a person who has I'm pretty easy with invasive medical things. Like, you can put things into things, and I'm mostly just like, that's medicine. It's part of what you do. Like, it's not comfortable. It's awkward or whatever, but you signed up for this job, so go ahead and put the gloves on, do what you do.
Right.
That was really, so for me, it was actually really disconcerting to feel so violated by a procedure because I had not felt like that before. It really sucked.
Yeah, I've had
my gynecologist. Go ahead, Merf.
I've had it done.
You had it done 3 times?
3 times. Because they thought at first I had cancer, and so they had taken a little, biopsy to check, and then I had they had found endometriosis that I was, actually given the diagnosis, and so then they were like, well, we got to check and make sure, and then when I started having really bad bleeding and that whole start of the process, they basically were like, well, let's just check, and every single one of those gynecologists said, okay, little pinch. And I don't know. I just I've tolerated so many things. Like, I don't even, want to go into all those things, but it's like, that was just like little pinch. Like,
it's not a fucking little pinch.
It's like somebody's taken like a chunk of the most sensitive tissue that you have and just like clipping it off with scissors. Like,
it's gross. It's awful. Yeah, it's really bad. And you have the recovery afterwards too. You feel crampy and stuff like that. My gynecologist, right before she did it, she said, this is the meanest thing I do to my clients. And I was like, great. Or her patients. Well, great. I meant to mention that about the cervix and orgasms and things like that too. I have lost the ability to have a cervical orgasm, which is from like the cervix getting bumped. So I haven't been able to do that again. But all my other orgasms are fine. So maybe I can develop that one again. But so far I haven't been able to do that one yet. So maybe because my cervix is different now. I don't know. But yeah, that colposcopy thing is bullshit. They should come with a warning and they should come with sedation.
But so, I'm sorry. So, Crystal, you have a cervix or you just have the vaginal cuff?
Cuff.
Yeah.
Sexy, huh? That my cuff. I always ask my sweetie, you want some of this cuff, don't you, babe? You want some more cuff? He's like, stop calling it that. I'm like, I know you want some. It's the craziest word. And they also call it a vault, which I'm like, yes, because in vaults, very precious things go in there.
Oh,
they're stored in there. So, but it's just,
right?
That's their medical term for the two things. But yeah, it's
or like, hey, baby, you gonna get at this vault later?
I know, yes.
You gonna try to crack this vault?
He's all, stop it.
I feel kind of sad that I have more tales to tell on this hysterectomy special episode than I would have on one of your regular episodes. It's boring right now, so
yeah.
I wish I had more. I'll try to light up some, summer adventures or something so I can come back for one of your regular episodes.
Sure.
Yes.
Anytime. Yeah, this is great.
That.
Really appreciate you sharing so much with us, Tigress. I know you're always you're like me, you're open book and you're not afraid to talk about anything that's even the uncomfortable shit, right? So
it's much appreciated because, as somebody who's now walking this path and going through it, I'm in the process of doing that, advocating and saying, hey, this is not going to work for me. I want the hysterectomy. I want this out of me because it's becoming so problematic. It's very, very much giving me the boost, to do that advocacy. And I hope that it does that for other people too. To, like you said, Tigress, you have to be in there and say, I need this. This is what I want. And just really push forward with your providers, because they don't know you in your body, and you have to be the one that says, no, this is what I need. I know my body.
Yeah, they are experts in some ways, in the body. They're not gods, right? Sometimes they think they are, sometimes we think they are not. And you are an expert in your body in a way that they are not, I think of it very similarly to how, like, if you are a kindergarten teacher, you're an expert in kids, right? But somebody who's a mom is an expert in their kindergartner in a way that you're not. And it takes both of you working together to get that kid through kindergarten, because mom doesn't see some of the shit her little brat does when she's not around. And that kindergarten teacher who works with 30 little brats a day for 30 years sees all kinds of things a parent doesn't see. So it takes both of them working together to get the kid through kindergarten, right? True. That's the parallel to your relationship with your medical team, right? They know stuff you don't know about bodies, and you know stuff they don't know about your body. And it takes y'all working together to get you through, whatever you need to get through. But, if you think they know everything and you let them treat you like they know everything, then, it's really hard not to. I don't want to belittle that pressure in any way, because it's really hard not to. And we are really acculturated to believe that doctors know everything. And
they know best.
We do. And they don't, they have information we don't have. They have expertise that we don't have. And we also have things they don't have.
One of my friends always reminds me, she always says, remember, they're practicing medicine. Like, it's true. Yes. They went to school. They got a lot of information that I probably don't have. I know I don't have. And they're applying it.
The other thing is, like, think about yourself on your job. No matter how good you are at your job, you can be really amazing at your job. You can be having done it for 20 years. You can be awarded in your job, whatever, and you still fuck up sometimes. So do medical professionals. So even the ones that do have your best interest in heart, the best bedside manner, they stay up to date on all the research, they have all the things, like you could be in their office on a bad day, or you could be in an office on the day that they're not thinking clearly, so they don't think of the thing that they would have said to you on some other day. Like, all of those things, all of those variables are there. So the more you just, like, ask and ask and ask and ask, the more likely you are to come to the thing where y'all are coming together. And then sometimes you don't have any choice. Like, one of the things that unfortunately does happen a lot in Facebook groups is people will talk about a doctor, and the first response from, like, the first round of responses will all be like, get rid of that doctor. You don't always have that choice. But sometimes you can involve your insurance agency in advocating for your insurance company and advocating for you. Sometimes your medical system or your hospital has a patient advocate who can be a voice for you, and other people don't use those services. So, like, just pull in whatever you can. Pull in all the things you can.
Great advice.
Absolutely. Well, I just appreciate both of your times and sharing such a personal, medical, private sort of conversation with everyone.
Vaginas.
Cervixes. Doing a little ASMR there.
Yeah, right.
But I really appreciate that, because I think this is going to be monumental to a lot of people and really make a difference. So, we want to hear from our folks, our community of, was this helpful? Do we need to have a second round of discussion about medical fat phobia or other experiences, and just kind of piece apart some of those issues that other people that have bodies in different shapes and sizes experience. And it's really enlightening, because there's so much shrouded, don't talk about this stuff kind of thing. And it's nice to just dispel all that junk.
Before I do our sign off, I want to just say I am always available for other fatties that want to talk about their hysterectomy. I do my best to make sure I try to get back to you either via email or phone call or a private message. I'll do what I can because I know it's scary. And what was the second thing I was going to say? See, this is what happens when you go into menopause instantly. Word aphasia. I forgot what I was going to say, the second thing, but I am available and I'm happy to help if I can. Oh, I know. I was going to say, if you don't know about NAFA.org, I would highly recommend you look into it. I think 52 years now, Tigress, they've been around.
Yes, 53.
53. So, and they're advocating for us. They're the organization that helps people when they want to help to get legislation passed in different cities. I know that NAFA has been involved in helping fat people to create a protected class in San Francisco, and they helped with that, right, Tigress?
San Francisco and Santa Cruz, where you are in California.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there are a handful of cities across the U.S., and we're also supporting some work in New York and Massachusetts now. Michigan is the only state that has a state law.
That's right. Yeah.
But we are supporting some work in Massachusetts and New York. We are also exploring where we want to take on leading some work next. So that legislative piece is really important. I just also want to give a shout out to NAFA's advocacy committee, who's starting to really lean into some work around. We have legislative advocacy, but we also have a crew of folks who are really leaning into some work around medical advocacy, around training for medical professionals, around, pushing back on bias research, like all of those kinds of things. And I also just want to give a shout out to one other organization, if that's okay.
Yeah.
The No Body is Disposable Coalition did really incredible work, and you can just Google No Body is Disposable. Or follow that hashtag on your favorite social medias. They did some really incredible work around vaccine access and around care rationing guidelines that were going to basically, leave fat and disabled people out in the cold in terms of care rationing. When resources were stretched during COVID, and especially in California and in Canada, they did that work. But they do have an active survey on their website that's about people who have, if you have an experience where you have, you've been not getting medical treatment that you need because of COVID shortages, because of COVID exposure, because of whatever, they are conducting research about that. So if you have experiences like that, please do go to their website and fill out their survey. But also just follow and support their work. They're really badass coalition of fat and predominantly fat and disabled activists with some other social justice activists backing up that work, and with lots of input from our friends at Fat Rose and from FLAIR, the Fat Legal Rights Organization.
Yes, love it.
Shout out to all of those people.
Yes, for sure.
Those of you who turned into the sexy chat and then got blood and guts and legislation.
I know. The Shining. I totally relate to The Shining.
Yeah. And but just know that NAFA is not the only organization doing advocacy work for fat community. Right. There are lots of folks out there doing this work, doing it through, and as much as we can through intersectional lenses. Some of our organizations better than others, and just really trying to work towards liberation for everybody. So, thank you, Crystal, for the way that you create community spaces that showcase this. Thank you, Merf, for, bringing us the big sexy chat with Crystal. And like I said, I hope to come back for a sexier topic.
Yes,
absolutely.
Sure.
I don't know that we can make hysterectomy sexy. Maybe I can make legislation sexy, but I don't think we can make hysterectomy sexy, but it's really important, and I'm really glad that
very important. Yeah, me too. Thank you, Tigress. Thank you, Merf. All right, so I will see you later, alligator.
After a while, crocodile.